11 symptoms of high blood pressure you shouldn't ignore. Robert was 68 years old when he started waking up every single morning with the same heavy, throbbing feeling behind his eyes. For 2 weeks, he blamed it on his new mattress, and honestly, so would most of us. He was wrong, and the real reason turned out to be something his own doctor almost missed too. This video is for educational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. If you have concerns about your blood pressure or your overall health, it is always a good idea to speak with a qualified healthcare provider. Here is something that surprises almost everyone the first time they hear it. High blood pressure is often called the silent condition, and for good reason. It can quietly affect the heart, the brain, the eyes, and the kidneys for years without a single obvious complaint. And Robert's morning headache was just the first thread that, once pulled, revealed a much bigger picture. There are subtle signals the body sometimes sends out, small clues that are easy to dismiss as stress, aging, or simply a bad night of sleep. Today we are walking through 11 of those signals, one by one, and toward the end we will look at a sign that many people notice, but almost never connect to their blood pressure at all, even though doctors consider it one of the more telling ones on this entire list. Before we get into the list, it helps to understand what is actually happening inside the body when blood pressure climbs. Blood pressure is essentially the force of blood pushing against the walls of your arteries as your heart pumps. When that force stays elevated over time, it can gradually put strain on blood vessels throughout the body, from the delicate vessels behind your eyes to the much larger ones surrounding your heart. That strain is why the symptoms on this list can seem so different from one another. They are not random. Each one reflects a different part of the body responding to that same underlying pressure. Doctors sometimes describe 2 general categories of high blood pressure. The first is called primary high blood pressure, which tends to develop gradually over years and is influenced by a combination of genetics, diet, activity level, and age. The second is called secondary high blood pressure, which appears more suddenly and is usually caused by an identifiable underlying issue, such as a kidney condition or a hormonal imbalance. The vast majority of cases fall into the first category, which helps explain why symptoms, when they do appear, tend to build slowly rather than arriving all at once. A blood pressure reading is typically expressed as 2 numbers, such as 120/80. The first number, called systolic pressure, measures the force in your arteries when your heart beats. The second number, called diastolic pressure, measures the force when your heart rests between beats. Generally speaking, a reading consistently at or above 130/80 is considered elevated, though your doctor is always the best source for interpreting your specific numbers, since individual health history can change what counts as a healthy target. It is also worth mentioning who tends to be at higher risk, since this context can make the following list easier to relate to your own life. Risk tends to increase with age, and it can run in families, meaning a parent or sibling with high blood pressure may be a signal to pay closer attention to your own readings. Diet, particularly one high in sodium and processed foods, along with limited physical activity, chronic stress, and excessive alcohol consumption, can all contribute as well. None of this means high blood pressure is inevitable for anyone with these risk factors, but it does mean that awareness becomes even more valuable, especially since, as we mentioned, this condition frequently develops without any noticeable symptoms at all. Number 1, morning headaches that feel different from the usual kind. Most of us have had an ordinary headache at some point, the kind that comes from dehydration, screen time, or simply skipping a meal. But some people who live with elevated blood pressure describe a very specific pattern, a dull, pressing headache that tends to show up first thing in the morning, sometimes located at the back of the head, and that eases up somewhat as the day goes on. Researchers believe this may be linked to changes in blood pressure that occur overnight, since pressure naturally dips during sleep and rises again shortly before waking. In someone with consistently elevated readings, that morning rise can be more pronounced. Remember Robert from the beginning of this video. His headaches were not diagnostic on their own, but they were one of several clues his doctor used to build a fuller picture. And it was his daughter's gentle insistence that finally got him to a checkup where his blood pressure came back well above the normal range. A pattern like this does not confirm anything by itself, but a recurring morning headache that feels unusual compared to your normal headaches may be worth mentioning to a healthcare professional, especially if it shows up alongside any other signs on this list. It also helps to know what tends to set this type of headache apart from a more ordinary one. Many people describe it as a dull pressure rather than a sharp pain, often centered at the back of the skull or across both temples, and it typically fades within an hour or two of waking, sometimes coinciding with the natural drop in pressure that occurs once a person becomes active and upright. This pattern can make it easy to dismiss, since by the time most people think to mention it to anyone, the headache has already passed. Keeping a simple note on your phone each time it happens, along with the approximate time it faded, can give a doctor useful information to work with if the pattern continues for more than a week or two. Number 2, frequent or unexplained nosebleeds. For most people, nosebleeds are simply a nuisance, often triggered by dry air, allergies, or a minor bump. However, some studies have observed a possible association between severely elevated blood pressure and an increased likelihood of nosebleeds, particularly in cases where blood pressure has risen sharply rather than gradually. The connection appears to relate to pressure changes affecting the small, fragile blood vessels lining the nasal passages. It is worth being clear here, since this is a commonly misunderstood point. Occasional nosebleeds during dry winter months are extremely common and are rarely a sign of anything serious. What tends to draw more attention from healthcare providers is a nosebleed that is unusually heavy, difficult to stop, or that occurs alongside other symptoms such as a severe headache or visual disturbances. If that combination ever happens, it may be a reason to seek medical attention rather than waiting it out at home. Number 3, a subtle change in vision or blurriness that comes and goes. The eyes contain some of the smallest and most delicate blood vessels in the entire body, which makes them particularly sensitive to changes in blood pressure. Over time, consistently high pressure can affect the tiny vessels in the retina, the light-sensitive layer at the back of the eye. This condition, sometimes referred to by doctors as hypertensive retinopathy, can lead to blurred vision, difficulty focusing, or in more advanced cases, patchy areas of vision loss. A woman named Carol, 72, mentioned to her ophthalmologist that reading her favorite mystery novels had become strangely tiring lately, as though the words were slightly swimming on the page. She had chalked it up to needing a new eyeglass prescription. During a routine eye exam, her doctor noticed subtle changes in the blood vessels at the back of her eyes and referred her for a blood pressure check, which came back significantly elevated. Her story is a good reminder that eye exams can sometimes catch things that general checkups miss, since the blood vessels in the eyes are visible in a way that most other blood vessels in the body are not. This is actually one of the reasons eye doctors sometimes describe the eye as a window into overall cardiovascular health. Because the retina's blood vessels can be examined directly and painlessly, changes that might otherwise go unnoticed elsewhere in the body can sometimes show up there first. This does not mean every visit to the eye doctor is a substitute for a blood pressure check, but it does mean that eye exams and blood pressure readings can work together to build a more complete picture of a person's health over time, which is one more reason not to skip either one. Number 4, shortness of breath with ordinary activity. Feeling winded after climbing several flights of stairs is normal for almost anyone. But some people with long-standing high blood pressure begin to notice breathlessness during activities that never used to bother them, such as walking to the mailbox or carrying in groceries. This can happen because prolonged high pressure forces the heart to work harder than it should, and over time that extra workload can lead to a thickening of the heart muscle, a condition doctors call left ventricular hypertrophy. A thickened heart does not pump quite as efficiently, which can contribute to that breathless feeling. This particular sign tends to develop gradually, which is part of what makes it so easy to miss. People often adjust their habits without realizing it, taking the stairs a little slower, resting a little more often, without ever consciously registering that something has changed. Some people even reorganize their homes around it without noticing, moving frequently used items to lower shelves or choosing routes with fewer stairs, all while telling themselves it is simply a matter of preference. If you or someone you love has noticed a gradual decline in exercise tolerance that cannot be explained by a cold, allergies, or lack of activity, it may be worth discussing with a doctor, since shortness of breath can have many causes and deserves a proper evaluation. It is also worth noting that sudden, severe shortness of breath, especially when paired with chest discomfort or a bluish tint to the lips, is a medical emergency and should never wait for a scheduled appointment. Number 5, chest discomfort or a feeling of tightness. Chest discomfort is one of those symptoms that should never be self-diagnosed, and if it is sudden, severe, or accompanied by pain radiating into the arm, jaw, or back, it requires immediate emergency medical attention. In the United States, that means calling 911 right away. With that said, some people with poorly controlled high blood pressure report a milder, recurring sense of tightness or pressure in the chest, particularly during physical exertion or emotional stress. This can be related to the heart working harder against elevated pressure in the arteries, and it can sometimes be an early signal of strain on the cardiovascular system. Because chest discomfort can indicate several different conditions, ranging from something relatively minor to something life-threatening, it is never something to guess about. Any new or unusual chest sensation deserves prompt medical evaluation rather than being explained away as stress or heartburn. Number 6, an irregular or noticeably fast heartbeat. Many people describe this as a fluttering feeling in the chest, a sense that the heart skipped a beat, or a heartbeat that suddenly feels faster than usual even while sitting still. Elevated blood pressure can place additional strain on the heart's electrical system over time, and in some individuals, this contributes to irregular rhythms, including a common condition called atrial fibrillation. Not everyone who experiences occasional heart flutters has high blood pressure, and plenty of harmless causes exist, including caffeine, anxiety, or simple dehydration. Still, a pattern of noticeable palpitations, especially when it becomes frequent, is generally worth bringing up with a healthcare provider so the underlying cause can be properly identified. Number 7, persistent fatigue that rest does not seem to fix. There is ordinary tiredness, the kind that a good night of sleep resolves, and then there is a deeper, more stubborn fatigue that lingers no matter how much rest a person gets. Some individuals with high blood pressure describe exactly this second type, a heavy, dragging tiredness that seems disconnected from their actual sleep quality or daily activity level. One possible explanation relates to the heart needing to work harder to circulate blood throughout the body, which over time can leave less energy available for everything else. A retired schoolteacher named Diane, 65, described feeling like she was moving through molasses for nearly a month before her yearly physical. She had assumed it was simply part of getting older. Her blood work came back normal, but her blood pressure reading was notably high, and once she began working with her doctor to manage it, her energy levels gradually improved over the following months. Fatigue by itself is an extremely common symptom with dozens of possible explanations, so it is not something to jump to conclusions about. But when it is persistent, unexplained, and paired with any of the other signs on this list, it becomes a more meaningful piece of the puzzle. Diane later mentioned that the hardest part was not the tiredness itself, but second-guessing whether it was even worth bringing up at her appointment, since it felt too vague to describe. That hesitation is extremely common, and it is one of the reasons this particular sign so often goes unreported until a doctor happens to ask directly. Number 8, dizziness or a sense of lightheadedness. This one tends to confuse people because dizziness is more commonly associated with low blood pressure rather than high blood pressure. However, Dizziness can occur in people with elevated blood pressure for a few different reasons. Sometimes it relates to certain blood pressure medications, sometimes it relates to sudden spikes in pressure, and in some cases, it can be connected to changes in blood flow to the brain caused by long-term vascular strain. Because dizziness has such a wide range of possible causes, from inner ear issues to blood sugar changes to dehydration, it is rarely useful as a standalone clue. It becomes far more relevant when it shows up unexpectedly alongside other symptoms on this list, particularly headache or vision changes. Number 9. Flushed or reddened skin, especially in the face. Some people notice their face becoming unusually flushed or warm during moments of stress, physical exertion, or even for no clear reason at all. Facial flushing happens when blood vessels near the surface of the skin widen, allowing more blood flow closer to the surface. While flushing can be caused by many everyday things, including sun exposure, spicy food, hot weather, or emotional reactions, some research suggests it may occur more frequently during periods when blood pressure is elevated. It is important to note that flushing alone is a poor indicator, since it happens to plenty of people with perfectly normal blood pressure. It is really only worth paying attention to when it becomes a frequent, unexplained pattern rather than an occasional occurrence. Number 10. A small red or bloodshot patch in the white of the eye. This next sign is the one we mentioned earlier, and it tends to be the one that catches viewers by surprise. Occasionally, a tiny blood vessel on the surface of the eye breaks, leaving behind a bright red patch on the white part of the eye. Doctors refer to this as a subconjunctival hemorrhage. It typically looks alarming, but is usually painless and often goes away on its own within 1 to 2 weeks. In many cases, it is caused by something completely unrelated to blood pressure, such as a forceful sneeze, rubbing the eyes too hard, or even certain types of coughing fits. That said, some healthcare providers have observed that this type of eye bleeding shows up somewhat more often in people whose blood pressure is significantly elevated at the time it occurs, since higher pressure can make small, fragile vessels more prone to rupture. A man named Thomas, 74, noticed a red patch in his eye after a coughing spell during a cold. He nearly ignored it entirely, assuming it was simply from coughing so hard. His wife encouraged him to mention it to his doctor anyway, just to be safe. During that visit, his doctor discovered his blood pressure was considerably higher than his last reading, information that turned out to be useful for his ongoing care. The lesson here is not that every red patch in the eye means high blood pressure, because most of the time it does not. The lesson is that it can be a reasonable prompt to get a blood pressure check, particularly if it happens without an obvious cause like coughing or eye rubbing. Number 11. Difficulty concentrating or a sense of mental fog. The last sign on our list is one that often gets attributed to stress, poor sleep, or simply having too much on one's plate. Some individuals with long-standing high blood pressure describe a subtle but persistent difficulty concentrating, a kind of mental fog that makes routine tasks, like following a conversation or remembering a short grocery list, feel more effortful than they used to. Researchers have studied a potential link between chronic high blood pressure and changes in blood flow to the brain over time, which may contribute to this kind of cognitive fatigue in some people. As with several signs on this list, mental fog has an enormous number of possible causes, ranging from thyroid issues to simple burnout, so it should never be assumed to point specifically toward blood pressure. Still, when it appears together with fatigue, headaches, or breathlessness, it becomes part of a broader pattern that a doctor may want to evaluate as a whole rather than as isolated complaints. Family members are often the ones who notice this particular sign before the person experiencing it does. A spouse might comment that someone seems to be repeating themselves more often, or a grown child might notice their parent taking longer to follow the plot of a television show they used to enjoy without any trouble. These small observations are not meant to alarm anyone, and in most cases, they turn out to be completely unrelated to blood pressure. But when a family member gently raises a concern like this, it is generally worth taking seriously rather than brushing aside. simply because outside observers sometimes catch gradual changes that are much harder to notice from the inside. Taken individually, none of these 11 signs can confirm high blood pressure on their own, and that is actually one of the most important takeaways from this entire video. High blood pressure earned its reputation as a silent condition precisely because its symptoms, when they appear at all, tend to be vague, inconsistent, and easy to attribute to something else entirely. This is exactly why regular blood pressure checks matter so much, even for people who feel completely healthy. A blood pressure reading takes less than 1 minute and requires no needles, no fasting, and no special preparation. Yet it can reveal information that symptoms alone often cannot. According to the World Health Organization, an estimated 1.28 billion adults between the ages of 30 and 79 worldwide live with high blood pressure, and nearly half of them are unaware they have it. That single statistic captures why this topic deserves attention. It is not a rare condition affecting a small handful of people. It is remarkably common, frequently silent, and in most cases, manageable once it is identified. The encouraging part of this story is that high blood pressure is often one of the more manageable chronic health concerns once it is actually identified. For many people, meaningful improvement can come from a combination of everyday changes, including reducing sodium intake, staying physically active on a regular basis, managing stress through practices like deep breathing or short daily walks, limiting alcohol, and getting consistent, quality sleep. For others, especially those with more significantly elevated readings, a doctor may recommend medication alongside these lifestyle changes. Neither path is better or worse than the other, since the right approach depends entirely on an individual's specific health picture. And that is a conversation best had directly with a healthcare provider rather than decided independently. What matters most is not which path someone ends up on, but simply that the conversation happens in the first place, since so much of the risk associated with high blood pressure comes specifically from it going unnoticed and unmanaged for years at a time. It is also worth remembering that home blood pressure monitors have become widely available, affordable, and remarkably accurate in recent years, making it easier than ever to keep an eye on your numbers between doctor visits. If any of the signs discussed in this video have felt familiar, tracking your blood pressure at home for a week or two, ideally at the same time each day, can provide useful information to bring to your next appointment. Many doctors specifically encourage this kind of at-home tracking, since a single reading taken during a stressful doctor's visit does not always reflect a person's typical, everyday numbers. If anything in this video sounded familiar, whether it was a lingering morning headache, an unexplained bout of fatigue, or a small red patch in the eye that you brushed off at the time, it may be worth scheduling a simple blood pressure check with your doctor. It is a small step that takes only a few minutes, but can offer meaningful insight into your long-term health. To bring this back to where we started, remember that nearly half of the 1.28 billion adults living with high blood pressure worldwide do not even know they have it. That gap between how common this condition is and how quietly it tends to go unnoticed is exactly why paying attention to these small, easily overlooked signs can genuinely make a difference. Before you go, we would love to hear from you. Have you ever experienced any of these 11 signs and later discovered a connection to your blood pressure? Share your experience in the comments below, since your story might be exactly what encourages someone else to get checked. If you found this video helpful, please consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you would like more clear, careful, and genuinely useful health education like this, subscribing helps us keep making videos just like this one. Thank you for watching, and take care of yourself.